Hello and welcome to Tête à Tête, France 24's flagship interview show. Our guest this week is Rémy Rioux. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the French Agency for Development. Thank you very much for being our guest.
Thank you for the invitation.
The U.S. President Donald Trump has suspended development aid and also essentially gutted out the main agency in charge of foreign aid, USAID. Obviously, we know that financially, the U.S. represents a lot of the spending for humanitarian aid. How much of difficulty is it for all the developing agencies that you're part of?
So of course it's a shock for our world, both this suspension for 90 days, we'll see how it ends up, and also the review of the participation of the US in international organization for 6 months, if I'm right. A thought for our colleagues at USAID, of course. Then I wanted to remind you that the figures are a bit different from defense to development and humanitarian. So the US are big. It's about 65 billion US dollar in 2023, but Europe is way bigger. It's 3 times bigger, 150 billion, meaning 2/3 of ODA comes from Europe, well, plus UK and Norway. So it's a bit in reverse. It's 3 times bigger when in defense we know the US is 3 times bigger than Europe. So we'll see how the system reacts to this shock in the coming week and months. And maybe that's personal view. Of course, I would like the contribution to Europe to be made more explicit and hopefully Europe to maybe affirm itself a bit more. This is the situation we're already in.
But just to go back
Yes.
to, I would say, immediate effects of this, in addition to USAID staff being kicked out and brought back to the US in a rush, 305 million people are going to need humanitarian emergency aid this year. Nearly half of the money for this is supposed to come from the US. This means that more people are going to die because of that decision.
No, I don't
correct?
want to downplay this, of course. And you know,
It's lives on the line. I mean, it's not just figures.
The signature of the US, notably since President Bush, is both humanitarian, 40% of the total, and also global health. So both at the multilateral level, WHO, global funds, and also with the PEPFAR program, which is the big bilateral contribution in many countries, especially about AIDS, but beyond. So in these 2 sectors, I was discussing it with Yasmin Belkaïd, the CEO of Institut Pasteur, this very morning. They will have strong consequences. It's a bit strange because, you know, the US theorized what they call the 3D strategy, which is articulating defense, diplomacy, and development in their foreign influence. So somehow, will they stay with only 2Ds and forget about the third one? It would be a huge change for sure.
The problem with this is that you have this drastic decision across the Atlantic, and in Europe, you have public development aid budgets going down. Let's just take France. The budget was recently passed, a cut of 2.1 billion euros. That is more than a third compared to last year for public development aid. This is a major shock as well, I assume. I mean, you're probably disappointed by this, but the decision was made. We need to cut expenses, and public development aid is one of the main victims.
So in France, true to say that the development policy is contributing to the effort to adjust our budget. I think the reasons are completely different from the US. In continental Europe, today President Macron is hosting the Artificial Intelligence Summit. So he launched what he called the 4P agenda. So he is very committed behind building a new global financial architecture. structure, changing the framework. So I would say this cut this year is, we'll see next year. The Prime Minister, François Bayrou, said we will resume an ambitious trajectory by 2026. So. And I noticed that in this moment, the government protected my agency, AFD. So we are asked to finance about 12 billion euro this year, which is the exact amount we financed last year. So, and you also know that we increased the global levies, which is a hot issue within the G20. So of course this year not allocated to the development policy, but
which was the case until now.
Which was the case since Jacques Chirac created these taxations. But maybe the debate could be reopened for next year. So again, I don't want. I clearly distinguish the two situations.
Yes, but when you talk to global humanitarian agencies or NGOs, they're extremely worried. They say the U.S. is turning its back on us. Europe is looking inwards. Europe wants to cut expenses, wants to reduce immigration. So a lot of the aid goes to fighting illegal immigration. The development aid is not there anymore.
Actually, our ecosystem, I would say, our world, which is not only humanitarian but also long-term development, somehow is, yes, differently, but is questioned in the US as well as in Europe.
In jeopardy,
and
maybe.
Globally. And so we have to think thoroughly about what happens with the old ODA narrative. And maybe the proposal made by President Macron years ago to turn to, he said, sustainable and inclusive investment. So something that would maybe more clearly and sincerely embark national interest, liaise with other countries' interest, and build a mutual interest. There's something here which comes to the public development banks in the end, being this kind of investors for global commons. So we are, I think, in passing from one state of our business, I would say, to another, and we have to speed up. There's a huge conference in Sevilla, UN conference end June, and I hope something stronger, more consistent will come out of the discussion.
But isn't it, in a way, what you're saying, a shift from public development aid to private sector investment, which is exactly what maybe Donald Trump has in mind, that you're saying, maybe without saying explicitly, that it's the end of public development aid as we've known it. We need private investors to jump in.
So I'm chairing, and we are building since notably 2020 a huge coalition called Finance in Common. It's the gathering of all the public development banks, not private. And everybody forgot that there are 530 public development banks in the world. It means 15%, 2.5 trillion US dollar investments each year, 15% of the total, public and private, that is public. And so the question is, this institution with a clear division of labor and a global architecture, how could they finance what nobody's financing? From ODA, I would say, but also allocate part of their concessional resources to mobilize private, because we know that 15% is not enough if we want to face climate change, reduce inequalities, change the value chains and our societies. So we will gather in Cape Town, same place, same dates as the first G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting under for the first time, an African presidency, South Africa, end of February. And I'm sure the discussion will go in this direction, challenged by the time we're in.
Right. In Africa, obviously, there is growth, but there is also the debt burden. There was a lot of discussion about how much Africa owes to China. Still is an issue. Some countries in Africa spend more on servicing their debt than financing their health system. How do you get out of this vicious circle? Is there any hope on the horizon?
Well, the problem in Africa is there's too much public debt.
Right.
There's not too much debt, because the problem is African economies, meaning private sector firms, are not financed. And the financial markets in Africa, able to transform savings, because there are savings in Africa, into investments, are not fully deployed like they are in other regions of the world. So I think we have to be cautious in saying Africa is over-indebted. This is not the case, really. It's about 30% of its GDP as a whole. So somehow we have to mobilize domestic resources. We have to strengthen local financial institutions, public banks, national, but also private banks, and do this work to rely less on the governments themselves. So that's the reason why you see President Trump, for instance, also at the same time when USAID was attacked, he appointed the new CEO of another institution called USDFC. He created under his first mandate, which is dedicated to finance the private sector abroad. So it's a bit of that discussion that we have to have.
Rémy Rioux, I want to thank you very much for being our guest here on France 24. And thank you all for watching this show.